But I mean, and I think this is a question for the other side as well. It's two-facing. Yes, of course, tariffs in dealings with foreign powers, but the vehicle is imposition of taxes on Americans, and that has always been the core power of Congress. So to have the president's foreign affairs power trump that basic power for Congress seems to me to kind of at least neutralize between the two powers, the executive power and the legislative power.
Let me say two things in response to that. First, the notion that the taxes are all borne by Americans and are not borne by foreign producers whose goods are imported is empirically, there's no basis for that in the record. It's actually a mixed.
Well, who pays the tariffs? If a tariff is imposed on automobiles, who pays them?
Typically there'd be regardless of who the importer of record is, there'd be a contract that would go along the sort of line of transfer that would allocate the tariff, and there'd be different. Sometimes the foreign producer would pay them. Sometimes the importer would bear the cost. The importer could be an American, could be a foreign company. A lot of times it's a wholly owned American subsidiary of a foreign corporation. So it gets allocated. The empirical estimates range from like 30% to 80% of like how much is borne by Americans.
I mean, it's been suggested that the tariffs are responsible for significant reduction in our deficit. I would say that's raising revenue domestically.
There certainly is an incidental and collateral effect of the tariffs that they do raise revenue, but it's very important that they are regulatory tariffs, not revenue-raising tariffs. And the way you can see this, I think, if you look at this policy is by far the most effective if nobody ever pays the tariffs. And I say two policies, right? So if you look at the trade deficit emergency, if nobody ever pays the tariffs and instead Americans direct their consumption towards American producers and stimulate the rebuilding of our hollowed-out manufacturing base, then the policy is by far the most effective. So a tariff, a regulatory tariff that...
Why not do what the statute permits? Bar importation of products altogether. That would be the most effective way to do it.
The question
you follow the statute. The statute says the president can do that. What it doesn't say is the president can raise revenue.
What it says is he can regulate importation and go back for hundreds of years the way you regulate imports,
pausing it, subjecting some countries and not others to importation bans. There's a lot of verbs, but none of them include generating revenue as a side effect or directly.
Let me address that verb point, if I may, because think about the canonical example, a statute that refers to a list of swords, knives, daggers, dirks, and pikes. There you look at that list of things and you say, aha, those are all weapons, therefore a pike is a spear, not a fish in that particular context. Now look at this list of verbs, block, prohibit, compel, direct, and so forth. You don't look at that naturally as an ordinary reader and say, oh, look, they're all not revenue raising. What you say is they're all very broad, powerful, actions that you can take.
The verbs that are in the statute are actually doing something. I mean, they're in the statute for a reason, and as I understand it, Congress actually explained to us in its Senate report and House report when it enacted the 1941 amendments to TWIA, what it was doing. It said that what we are doing is authorizing the president, in the Senate report, quote, to control or freeze property transactions where a foreign interest is involved. There's similar language about controlling, freezing control in the House report. So I appreciate that generally you can look at these words and you can imagine that they mean certain things, but here we have evidence that Congress was actually trying to do a particular thing with respect to the authority that it was presenting to the president, and that thing was not raising revenue.
I think that the powers that Congress was conferring on the president are best understood through the plain text of the statutes, which includes regulating importation.
No, I know, but some of us care about the legislative history. And so the plain text of the statute has certain verbs in it. It also has regulate commerce, as you say. And when I look at the legislative history, it appears as though Congress was trying to give the president the authority to, quote, control or freeze property transactions where a foreign interest is involved. And in the TWIA context, that makes perfect sense because we're talking about a wartime dynamic. And what is happening is the president needs the authority to prevent trading with the enemy in the midst of a war. And that seems to be the focus of this statute. So I guess I'm concerned about just sort of taking a particular word here and there and saying that the general view of it might include raising revenue when, in fact, it looks as though the aim of this was really to give the president a certain kind of authority, to freeze the assets of the enemy.
And let me say two things in response to that. First, as the notion that this is a revenue-raising tactic or power, it is not. We are asserting a regulatory power. It's a delegation of the power to regulate foreign commerce. The way to control imports traditionally has been to tariff them. They say, well, you can impose quotas. Well, quotas are essentially economically equivalent to tariffs. So the question is, why would you be able to quota under-regulate but not tariff under-regulate when the tariffs are themselves regulatory? And let me turn back to the question the response I was giving to the Chief Justice to illustrate that.
Could the answer be that in other places where Congress wants that particular form of regulation to be used, they say impose duties. They say you can tax, Mr. President. Here they don't say that.
I'd say two things in response to that. That's the very argument that this court rejected in Algonquin. That the fact that these other specific statutes do you say it a certain way, you have to do it this way.
If we disagree with you that Algonquin is a similar context, do you have another statute or another circumstance?
And again, not to cite Algonquin again, but obviously
Yes.
we discussed the phrase adjust imports. And they said, no, the natural way to do that is to tariff them. And they specifically said it makes no sense at all to authorize quotas, which was conceded that statute did authorize, but not tariffs, because those are equivalent.